Dear students, I welcome you to this lecture. It is about the social learning theory of motivation by Albert Bandura. The main objectives of this lecture include to know about the basics of social learning theory, to know about the aspects of observational learning, to understand the principles of social learning theory, to understand the importance of observation, modeling and cognition, and to be familiar with the educational implications of social learning theory. Students, there are plenty of theories that have been proposed over the years to help explain how people learn and get motivated. One of these theories is social learning theory, a theory that indicates the learning process is linked with a person's social behavior. Albert Bandura, the American psychologist known as the father of cognitive theory, developed this learning theory. Differing from other learning theorists who look at learning as a direct result of conditioning, reinforcement and punishment, Bandura asserts that most human behavior is learned and motivated through observation, imitation and modeling. He explored the question of what needs to happen for an observable behavior to be learned and cited four necessary steps, that is attention, retention, reproduction and motivation. This theory emphasizes the importance of observing, modeling and imitating the behaviors, attitudes and emotional reactions of others. It considers how both environmental and cognitive factors interact to influence human learning and behavior. In observational learning or modeling, a new behavior is learned simply by watching someone else behave. In a real sense, such learning is the ability to profit from another's successes or mistakes. This type of learning is important because the learning can occur without an individual ever having to perform the behavior. Thus, watching another child put a finger in an electric outlet and get shocked is enough to keep the observing child from behaving the same way. Similarly, noticing that friends do well in school because they study hard may be a sufficient stimulus to motivate students. Bandura states, learning would be exceedingly laborious, not to mention hazardous, if people had to rely solely on the effects of their own actions to inform them what to do. Fortunately, most human behavior is learned observationally through modeling. From observing others, one forms an idea of how new behaviors are performed, and on later occasions, this coded information serves as a guide for action. Social learning theory explains human behavior in terms of continuous reciprocal interaction between cognitive, behavioral and environmental influences. This theory is based on the idea that we are motivated to learn from our interactions with others in a social context. After observing the behavior of others, people assimilate and imitate that behavior, especially if their observational experiences are positive ones or include rewards related to the observed behavior. According to Bandura, imitation involves the actual reproduction of observed motor activities. According to behaviorists' view, how and why we are motivated to behave in a particular manner is fashioned by the experiences we receive through the acts of learning or training. Many times our behavior is guided through a simple stimulus response mechanism as emphasized by E.L. Thorndike or operated through the mechanisms of classical or operant conditioning as educated by Ivan Pavlov, Watson and B.F. Skinner. The role of reinforcement as a prime factor for the motivation of behavior was properly emphasized in Skinner's theory of operant conditioning. He asserted that an organism behaves in the way and manner in which its behavior is shaped through a particular reinforcement schedule. Moving in the footprints of Skinner, social learning theorist Albert Bandura maintained that human motivation is mainly guided through social rewards like praise. Thus, a girl often praised for her skill in the kitchen will turn into a very effective cook and a good housewife. According to him, the imitation of others' behavior, if it results in a reward, provides a valuable motivational source for most of us, and that is why the concept of modeling is more commonly employed in the world of industry and advertisement. Students, there are three concepts very much emphasized in social learning theory. Firstly, people can learn through observation, which is known as observational learning. Secondly, mental states are important factor for learning. It is also named as intrinsic reinforcement. Finally, it refers to this point that learning does not necessarily lead to a change in behavior, and it follows by modeling process. The most common and pervasive examples of social learning situations are television commercials. Commercials do suggest that having a certain drink or using a particular hair shampoo will make us popular and win the admiration of attractive people. Depending upon the component processes involved, such as attention or motivation, we may model the behavior shown in the commercial and by product being advertised. Now, let us understand the four aspects of observation learning. First, it is attention, that is, attending to or perceiving the behavior. First, the learner needs to pay attention. If they are distracted, this will influence the amount or quality of learning that occurs. Here, in this step, the learner is made to observe the behavior of the person acting as a model. The more interesting or unique the model or situation is, the more fully the learner will attend to the learning. Next one is retention, that is, remembering the behavior. Here, the internalized representation of the modeled behavior is registered. It means what the learner observes is fixed in her or his memory in the form of mental image. We have all learned so much content throughout our years of schooling through a number of memory techniques, for example, mnemonic devices, writing it down, repetition, etc. And sometimes, while applying the learning to a real life situation, which aids in retention. Then there is the next step, that is reproduction or performance. Reproduction lies on the first two steps, attention and retention. After completing these steps, we move toward performing the observable behavior. Then with further practice, we will undoubtedly improve and sharpen our skills. The adage, practice makes perfect, applies here. Here, the memory is converted into action. It means the performance involving motor responses are produced by imitation. Then there is the next step, that is motivation or consequence. The last step is motivation. To have the most success for any observational learning, you need to be motivated enough to imitate the behavior that was modeled. In this step, both reinforcement and punishment impact motivation. If a student sees someone being rewarded, they are more likely to continue the behavior. Likewise, if they see someone punished or ignored, they may extinguish the behavior. In other words, the behavior of the model that is imitated by the learner needs to be reinforced for proper adoption and also for further continuance. Here is an example that may help us to understand the steps clearly. A newly married girl is watching the preparation of a new dish on a TV program. She sees the demonstration and retains in her memory whatever she has observed. She then goes in the kitchen and, as per her remembrance, prepares the dish. This preparation of the newly learned dish gets reinforced when she gets a good response from her family members who taste the new dish. And in this way, learning through observation and modeling prove to be effective means of motivation and learning. Now, the importance of motivation and mental state. Bandura claims that observation alone may not be sufficient for learning to occur. A person's motivation and their mental state also influence learning. Bandura agreed with the behavioral theorists who noted that external reinforcement shapes learning. But he also acknowledged that learning is not always a result of external reinforcement. He claimed that learning is a result of intrinsic reinforcement as well. For example, a student might learn something because of his or her pride, for a sense of satisfaction, or to fulfill a feeling of accomplishment. This factor of learning intrinsically connects Bandura's learning theory to those of other cognitive developmental theories, because it encompasses attention, memory and motivation. Social learning theory spans both cognitive and behavioral frameworks. Students, let us see how behaviors are learned through modeling. The people who are being observed are called models, and the process of learning is called modeling. Studies confirmed that at least partly of many behaviors can be learned through modeling. Some examples that can be cited on this regards are: students can watch parents read, students can watch the demonstrations of mathematics problems, or see someone acting bravely in a fearful situation. Aggression can also be learned through models. Much research indicates that children become more motivated to aggressive behavior when they observe aggressive or violent models. Now let us go through the principles of social learning theory. Social learning theory included human cognition, the social environment, modeling and reinforcement. Bandura helped formulate his first idea about the theory in 1963 and continued to refine the theory in the coming years. 5 major principles regarding the theory emerged. First, the first principle that served as the basis was that learning was not just a behavioral process that responded to stimuli. Instead, behavior was a cognitive process that happened within the larger social environment. People think about their behaviors, consider their environment, and make decisions regarding what they want to do. Second principle, a second principle underlying social learning theory was that learning and behaviors could be reinforced. Learning could be reinforced based on the consequences of those actions. Punishments and rewards could increase or decrease the likeliness that a behavior would be repeated, which was called direct reinforcement. However, social learning theory implied that learners could also see the consequences of a behavior in others. Instead of directly experiencing the consequence, the learner could learn by observing the outcome of an action that others took. This was called as vicarious reinforcement. The third principle underlying the theory was the importance of observation, which was highly linked to the second principle. When observing, learners do observe the outcomes of an action, including whether it is rewarded or punished. However, learners also observe the process that goes into the action so that they can repeat it by themselves. The fourth principle behind the theory is that reinforcement does support learning. However, unlike previous theories indicated, learning is not dependent entirely on reinforcement. Instead, observation and social context play a significant role. As such, the fourth principle indicates that learning is the result of multiple influences instead of any specific one. The final principle underlying the theory is that learners are active in their own learning process. Instead of being passive recipients of information, learners are engaged in their own learning process. They think about their behaviors, engage in their environment, and reciprocate with the influence that impacts them. Rather than being passive vessels to which information is transferred and behavior taught, individuals are active learners who negotiate their environment. Now, let us see the importance of observation, modeling, and cognition. Students, social learning theory indicates that observation, modeling, and cognition all interact to form learning. As such, all three should be considered when trying to understand how learning occurs. Human beings do more than simply respond to their environment. So, behavior cannot be only a process of responding to stimuli. Instead, learning occurs by observation. People are motivated to learn by observing the outcome of an action as well as the details of successfully completing a task. Having observed someone else, people then create models in their minds of the behavior. the process that informs the behavior and the likely outcome. People judge the outcome and learn about whether they want to take the action based on whether the outcome is positive or negative. Now, types of models. There are different types of models that a person can use in order to model an action and its outcomes. First, the most traditional and commonly used models are live models. In these models, an action is taken and modeled for a learner. A person may demonstrate how to change a light bulb for another person, for example, including turning off the light, unscrewing the bulb, and screwing on the new bulb before turning on the light again. A second type of model includes verbal instruction. With a verbal model, people aren't physically shown how to perform a task or demonstrate a behavior that they are supposed to replicate. Verbal instruction includes situations in which a person is told about a behavior or task. In this case, learners are told about the details instead of physically shown the behavior. Instead of physically showing a person how to change the light bulb, an instructor could instead provide verbal instructions about how to change the light bulb. Finally, the third type of modeling that occurs is symbolic modeling. Symbolic modeling refers to the models that people observe in various kinds of media: television, movies, the internet, the radio, and books can all describe completing an action. Because this involves modeling a behavior in a way that doesn't involve direct interaction with another person, the model is very much symbolic. Now, students, let us go through the educational implications and applications of social learning theory for teachers and students. First, this theory can be used to teach positive behaviors to students. Teachers can use positive role models to increase desired behaviors and thus change the culture of a school. Not only will individual students benefit from positive role models in and out of the classroom, but the entire class and student body will do so. Next, other classroom strategies such as encouraging children and building self-efficacy are rooted in social learning theory. For example, if a teacher is positive with their students and they encourage them, this positive energy and verbal encouragement in turn helps build self-efficacy. And self-efficacy is the belief in one's abilities to succeed in various situations. Albert Bandura found that a person's self-efficacy impacts how his or her tasks, goals, and challenges are approached. Those individuals with strong self-efficacy welcome challenges, develop deep interests in the activities they participate in, form a strong sense of commitment to activities, and bounce back from disappointments easily. However, those with a weaker sense of self-efficacy tend to avoid challenges, think difficult tasks are beyond their abilities, think negatively about their failures, and lose confidence. Next one, Bandura states that learning every single thing from personal experience is hard and could be potentially dangerous. He claims that much of a person's life is rooted in social experiences. Thus, observing others is naturally advantageous to gain knowledge and skills. Then there is the fourth one. Observation plays a very powerful role in learning. It not only helps teach students but helps them to successfully understand, retain, and apply their learning to their lives so they can learn and achieve even more. The next one, the emphasis on creating engaged learners who replicate what they have learned has made social learning theory attractive to educators. As a result, teachers have become more focused on incorporating social learning theory into the classroom. The sixth one of the big messages from social learning theory is the importance of maintaining engaged students and modeling behavior for those students. So, teachers have now changed how they design their classrooms to create environments allowing students to both become more highly engaged and go for extensive time to replicate the task. Another example of how education has changed includes the increase in peer learning. In a peer learning classroom, teachers place an emphasis on allowing peers to teach other peers. This allows for increased engagement as students work with one another. The more experienced student can act as an instructor, modeling the behavior for the learning student. Students also feel more highly motivated when learning comes from other students, making peer learning an excellent example of implementing social learning theory. Social learning theory has been applied extensively to the understanding of aggression and psychological disorders, particularly in the context of behavior modification. It is also the theoretical foundation for the technique of behavior modeling, which is widely used in training programs. Albert Bandura is arguably the most eminent psychologist whose social cognitive theory has influenced many areas of inquiry, that is education, health sciences, social policy and psychotherapy, etc. And again, learning can occur without a change in behavior. Behaviorists say that learning has to be represented by a permanent change in behavior, while in contrast, social learning theorists say that because people can learn through observation alone, their learning may not necessarily be shown in their performance. Learning may or may not result in a behavior change. Bandura demonstrated that cognition plays a role in learning. The next step, social learning theory represented a significant change in how learning was conceptualized. It indicated that learners were active in the learning process and that learning a behavior required more than just responding to something occurring in the environment. Learning required that people observe their environment, become motivated to replicate a behavior from their social context, and learn not only from their own action but from replicating behaviors modeled for them. This approach to learning helped change approaches to teaching because it placed a greater emphasis on creating an active classroom in which students have hands on their materials and learn from models demonstrated for them. Dear students, to conclude, we must say that social learning theory is viewed as one of the most influential theory of learning, motivation and development. This theory has often been called a bridge between behaviorist learning theories and cognitive learning theories because it encompasses attention, memory and motivation. Bandura believes that direct reinforcement could not account for all types of learning and motivation. For that reason, in his theory, he added a social element, arguing that people can learn new information and behaviors by watching other people. Using Bandura's social learning theory in the classroom can help students reach their potential. Students do not only imitate each other but also the teacher. Being a good role model, open to all the students and holding the students to a level of responsibility will be imitated by the students according to Bandura. Bandura indicated that any learning theory that did not integrate the social aspect of learning was insufficient to explain learning behavior in humans. As a typical social learning theorist, Albert Bandura highlighted the role of social rewards for the motivation of human behavior. Students, it was all for today. I hope you might have enjoyed this session. Thanks.